guys, it's Lizzie. So today I'm going to talk about birth control and why I will never use birth control even when I am married. I'm going to talk about is not the main reason or the theological reason for why I am against birth control, but it's something that is never talked about that I find really troubling. Hormonal birth control, which is what a majority of birth control is harming our marine life. Women who take an oral contraceptive, have a shot, a patch, even a hormonal IUD, they end up peeing out part of the birth control hormones, and that ends up in our wastewater, which ends up in the ocean, and it really is harming our marine animals because when it gets ingested into a male animal, it messes up their reproductive system and makes them incapable of producing children. It essentially demasculinizes these male animals or creates intersex animals. The European Union actually had a resolution where they were going to clean up their wastewater before it pollutes and harms the ocean. That would be through the removal of EE2, which is ethanol estradiol. This is just a really arduous and extremely expensive process, so nothing is being done about it, and the widespread use of women using hormonal birth control, it's really harming to our ecosystem. So that's not the main issue, but that's just something that really bothers me that I find no one is talking about. Something else I wanted to say for anyone who is not that familiar with Catholic teaching. So the Catholic Church does allow the use of birth control for medical purposes. So if you have ovarian cysts and have to take birth control so that your ovaries do not burst and kill you, or that it gets so bad that it requires surgery, if you just take birth control, it prevents the ovarian cysts from growing and it completely solves the problem. And I actually feel so personal about this issue because my grandma died when she was 19 because of ovarian cysts, and so my dad was an orphan. My dad's mom never got to meet my mom, me, or my older sister, and so she was really poor and did not have access to healthcare. And so the Catholic Church is pro-medicine, pro-science. In the Western world, it was Catholics who advanced science and honestly created modern science. So the Catholic Church is not against medicine, and as long as you're using birth control not to prevent yourself from having children, but for a medical reason, even if you just have a really painful period and you're using it for that, you're allowed to in Catholicism. So now to the main point of this video, the theological reason why I am against birth control. So I believe that objectively, biologically, the purpose of sex is twofold. It's unitive to bond the couple together, and it is a way for humans to reproduce and have children. It's so interesting because we live in this post-sexual revolution hookup culture where sex is treated so casually, and a lot of people would reject this notion that the purpose, the meaning of sex is to bond a couple together or to have children. But these are just biological realities of the nature of sex. When we have sex, the body releases a lot of dopamine, so there's a huge pleasure rush why so many people have casual sex. But there's also other hormones released called oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It causes you to want to be more emotionally vulnerable and to trust more and to stay together. Vasopressin is a hormone that only males experience, and it causes them to feel protective over their partner. So I believe that biologically and theologically, and this is what the Catholic Church teaches, that these are the two purposes of sex, and that every single sexual act needs to be unitive and open to life. Sex, marriage, having children used to be intertwined. They used to be the same thing, but now with birth control, people have been able to disconnect children from the meaning of sex. And again, biologically, objectively, that's just one of the purposes of sex. So I think that this disconnect that birth control has allowed has been disastrous in the way Christians have understood our sexual ethics. If you're from my generation, then I know you will be able to relate to this. But I know so many passionate, committed, serious Christians. They go to church multiple times a week. They're in Bible study. They pray and read their Bible all the time. They love God. They're an active believer. But they see nothing wrong with having sex outside of marriage. And I have been shocked. Absolutely shocked, because so many of my friends who I grew up in church with or have done ministry with, they are committed Christians, but they see no reason why you shouldn't be able to have sex in a committed dating relationship. In fact, I've had these intense discussions with some of my friends, and they've been arguing that it is actually unhealthy in a dating relationship to not have sex, that it's unhealthy to not be just as close physically as you are emotionally and spiritually. And as I was discovering Catholicism and researching in and understanding theology of the body and human vitae, I kind of connected all of this, and I understood that the reason that so many people in my generation are struggling to understand that sex is for marriage, the reason there's this huge disconnect is because we no longer see one of the main purposes of sex as being to have children. When it's completely disconnected, when you can use birth control, when you can separate children from sex, there's really no reason to save sex for marriage. And so I believe that a correct understanding of traditional Christian sexual ethics, which excludes the use of birth control, will bring all Christians back to the understanding that sex is for marriage. Even before I became Catholic and accepted all of the Catholic sexual ethics, I was 100% sex is for marriage. It just seems so obvious to me theologically, just at the very beginning of scripture where it talks about how the man will leave his father and mother and become united, become one in flesh with his wife. And then Jesus repeats that in the gospel, so it just always seems so obvious to me that sex is for marriage. But my generation is intensely struggling with this, where once birth control has become part of the equation, we see no reason to not have sex outside of marriage. Another trend I've seen in our culture, which is related to this, is a lot of people have this attitude where they want to get married in the future, but it's kind of optional if you want to have kids or not. There's a lot of people who just say, I do not want to have kids. And when I started learning about Catholicism, it was a completely different understanding of marriage. In Catholicism, if you don't want to have children, then it really doesn't make sense to get married. I made a video last summer about sex, dating, and marriage, lies Christians believe about it. I'll link it here and below. And in the video, I talked about how marriage is a metaphor of God and the church. And so just like how through baptism the church produces new believers, in a marriage, sex produces children. That's just the natural result. And there's a phrase that a lot of Catholics use, open to life, in regards to this, which just means that we view children as a positive thing. It's so crazy because before I learned Catholic sexual ethics, I used to view having children in such a negative way. I thought of it as pregnancy scare, and I thought that even within a marriage, if I didn't decide to have a child, if I became pregnant without wanting to be pregnant, I would see it as even a violation and such a negative thing and a terrifying thing. I think that we live in such a capitalistic culture that we see it as children even being a burden, as it being so expensive to raise a child and to pay for college, and so we just want to reduce the amount of children that we have, and we see having too many children as a burden or as a negative thing. And this is a brand new concept in our cultural consciousness. It would have been unheard of even 100 years ago to view having children as a negative thing and to not want to have children. All throughout the Bible, having children is seen as a great blessing by God, and anytime someone cannot get pregnant, they're always praying and asking God for miracles, like asking God to bless them with children. Another perspective I wanted to share is that the purpose of sex is giving yourself fully to the other person, giving yourself fully physically, but not only that, because in Christianity, sex is the covenant part of marriage. The way we take communion in church, which reinstates our covenant relationship with God, is exactly what sex is in marriage. And so you're giving yourself fully to the other person, and not just physically, but emotionally, and the commitment of your entire life. That's what God created sex to be. And so when you bring birth control in it, you're not giving that part of yourself, your fertility, to your partner. You know what I mean? Sex is giving all of you to the other person, but not this. And so I think of it as philosophically, theologically, sex is more vulnerable and emotionally intense and amazing and passionate, fully all of you, by not using birth control. And I know that initially that can seem really, really scary, and it can be a negative, terrifying type of vulnerable. But I just think that the nature of sex is that you're giving all of yourself to the other person. And I think that birth control intrinsically obstructs that. Something else, I think that everyone will agree with me, if our entire society only had sex within marriage, it would solve a lot of problems. Because a lot of times people do not take their birth control, and hormonal birth control, if you take it the same time every day, it does have a 99% success rate. But if you're ever traveling in a different time zone, or even just getting sick, there's a lot of different things that can throw it off. Lots of people get pregnant while on birth control. And so all I mean is that sex can lead to having children. And so many children in our country grow up with a single parent. I think every child has a right to be raised in a home with both of their biological parents. I think that is just ideal. And there are situations as well where you're having sex and you're in a relationship, but you're not ready to make that marriage commitment, and then you get pregnant and you decide to stay together or to get married because you got pregnant, and then maybe that's not the most stable marriage, the most stable situation for the children. And so all that I'm saying is that if everyone had Christian sexual ethics where we only had sex in marriage, we didn't use birth control, we viewed a purpose of sex as for having children, I think that the children who would be born would have a a much more stable home environment and be able to be known and loved and taken care of and raised by both of their biological parents. So in Catholicism, they do allow something called NFP, natural family planning, which has also been called the rhythm method in the past. The way this works is if you want to space out your children more, you cannot have sex for 7 to 10 days of every single month. Even though this may work similar to birth control, it is not birth control, because in Catholicism, the mortal sin in using birth control is that you are having sex, but when you are having sex, intentionally using birth control or contraception in a way that will prevent you from getting pregnant. So with NFP, you're just not having sex during different times, so that's not a sin. It's only a sin when you are intentionally having sex and making it not open to life. I think NFP could become sinful if the couple isn't open to life at all and just doesn't want to have children. Also, as a side note, the US population is decreasing. This is something people bring up sometimes, trying to be clever, saying that it's irresponsible to have a lot of kids. But unless we let in a huge influx of more immigrants, we're gonna have this huge economic problem in a few decades with paying for Social Security and Medicare. And so you want a stable population. And so many people are not having children now that it's really going to harm our country. And if you are not Catholic and completely disagree with me on this, something I want everyone to know is that I hated this church teaching the absolute most. I swore I would never change my mind on it. I cried so much last summer thinking of changing my mind on this because I had so much fear. I think as a female, we carry a majority of the burden of pregnancy, and it's not a burden being pregnant, but you know what I mean? It just majorly affects your life. And I saw the church's belief on this as so sexist, in that it's not allowing women to excel in their careers and get higher education. I just saw it as so sexist and against women. And to anyone who's having trouble accepting this teaching, I have bipolar disorder, and that was a huge reason why I was so scared to ever be in a situation where I could get pregnant. And I wasn't at a point where I never wanted to get pregnant, but it's just something that is very dangerous for me because there are only a few bipolar medicines that you can be on when you are pregnant. So I would have to go off all of my medicine pretty suddenly. I wouldn't have time to taper down because the medicine I take causes really bad birth defects, and it's honestly life-threatening for people with bipolar to not be medicated because of the nature of severe depression, manic episodes. So this was something that was a huge sacrifice for me to accept, just in that it could endanger my health, in that I could get pregnant when I'm in a really severe depression or manic episode and then not be able to properly medicate and take care of myself. And it is even damaging to a fetus if you're in depression while you're pregnant. So it's just a huge risk factor for me. But I researched into it really intensely, and I found a lot of information about natural family planning, NFP. I'm gonna link some articles below, so go read up on it. But basically what you do is you get this really precise temperature, a basal body temperature. You take your temperature every single morning, and there's other ways as well to track your fertility. It honestly seems to have a high learning curve, so you have to be really serious about tracking it every single day. But your body temperature actually spikes up when you ovulate after the egg has been released, so it can be very precise tracking fertility. Basically, all I'm saying is that as a woman with bipolar, I'm confident that in the future, if I was in a really severe depression episode and it would be unsafe for me to get pregnant, I trust myself in properly doing NFP as a way to not get pregnant if it was something that was dangerous for me. And my attitude towards having children has completely changed. I used to view it in such a negative light and think of things in terms of pregnancy scare, and just thought that even in a marriage relationship, I want to have children on my timeline. But now I'm at a point where if the first month of being married, I get pregnant, I will be so happy and so excited. I want to have a lot of kids, and I even want to adopt 2 kids. I'm really pro children, pro open to life. And I've talked about this in videos before, but when you are dating and choosing who to marry, it's not just about you and who helps you to grow emotionally and spiritually, but you're thinking of someone who's going to be an intellectual, a spiritual mentor to your future children. And our society has a completely different view of marriage, where we see it as a way to self-actualize each other. Yes, self-actualization is part of it. Yes, there's this unitive aspect of enjoying sex, but also marriage and sex is always about children and raising the next generation of the church. Those are all of my views on why I will not use birth control. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!